This book is in every school library, every public library in Illinois. We had to work a little bit to get that done, but we had a generous donor that basically allowed it to go all over. So kids everywhere will read, the stories and the things that we put in the book. And that was another thing Andy really wanted to do, and so we achieved that. Andy was a very remarkable man. Twice nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, which is the highest award in journalism. Twice second. Like that far from being the top award in the country. Our series that we did, that's why we did the book. It was best in Illinois in top reporting award 2 years consecutively as far as the series. We had so much material that we felt like we had to spread it into a book and over 2 years as far as the series. But basically, it got a lot of high reviews, including James Polk. You may or may not know who he is, but he was with CNN. He directed a lot of their key things that they did for years. He said when the book was released, King's prophetic voice is alive today in the personal stories of people in the book. And he said it was a remarkable and evocative series of personal portraits of ordinary people, many of whom met and knew Martin Luther King, and whose lives were changed forever by his death at a critical crossroads in our nation's history. The thing that Andy a lot of times would do when he spoke, and he of course can't speak now, but I'm going to kind of speak for him, I think, with what I read. So basically, the introduction is one of the more remarkable pieces of writing that I felt like Andy ever did. But he started, "I'll always remember the day I met Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. It was a cool morning in March 1965 along Highway 80 in the cotton field country of Alabama. Reverend King was leading a voters' rights march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. Andy was there for this at this time. He was a young reporter, and basically back then it wasn't like you had cell phones and you could send everything back in 5 seconds, or email things the way it is now. But he used daily reports with the Associated Press to get information back. If you can picture this, he said, I carried a backpack with a notebook, camera, soap, towels, toothbrush, and sleeping bag. Sometimes the marchers slept alongside the road. As the fog began to clear early on the March day, the beautiful bright orange sun rose over the cotton fields. Then I saw an amazing sight. Hundreds of people were lined up along the highway, ready to start the day, walking another 10 miles to the state capitol." I'll continue on another page here. Reverend King was leading the people in prayer, asking protection during another day of walking. And I always wondered, in the beginning, before I talked to Andy too much about this, did he actually get to personally have an encounter with Dr. King, which he did. So basically, on this March day in 1965 in Alabama, it was dangerous. The road was dusty, the march was long and weary. Reverend King was tired. He had blisters on his feet from miles of walking, probably wearing a suit from the pictures and things that I've seen. But his voice was strong and reassuring. He looked at a long line of marchers and he said, "Brothers and sisters, don't give up. Persevere. Keep on walking." Basically, Andy continued the march, and basically during some of it, rocks and things were thrown at him because he was walking within it. And Andy snapped this picture that's on the cover of the book, which should have probably won like a biggest award in the country, but it's going right as they go in, finishing the march. And he was real proud of that. There's another one on the back here. I don't know if that picture exists anywhere other than in my book anymore, because a lot of things have been thrown away at the Telegram. Basically, this is what he said. I keep saying basically. "I walked alongside Reverend King taking pictures. I said to him, 'Reverend King, you said to the people we're on a spiritual journey.' 'Yes,' he replied to Andy, 'we're on a spiritual journey today.' He paused for a few seconds and said, 'Brother Andrew, life is a spiritual journey. As we walk our path through life, God calls us to reach out with a helping hand to people we meet along life's way.' Then he spoke the words that touched my heart. He took my hand and said, 'Brother Andrew, it's my prayer that your life will be a spiritual journey to reach out to the needy and to help those suffering from injustices.' He stood there for a couple minutes, and I think that encounter probably had more to do with what Andy did the rest of his life than maybe anything that ever occurred in his life. And he helped Community Hope Center, Salvation Army, any charity that there was, he did it, and he did it from his heart. Even in his last days, he would call me and give me a suggestion on something to do, and I always followed it, with whatever he was wanting. But he's a tremendous reporter. James Earl Ray always fascinated me. Basically why he would do what he did, and he was from Alton. And I wanted to find out more about what had happened and everything. So we got to meet. Well, first, before I go into that, I used to sit in the newsroom at the Telegraph, and I'd say 4 or 5, maybe 6 times, Andy would be on the phone, and he would pre-warn me. He said, the newsroom's got to be quiet. I'm going to be calling James Earl Ray in prison. So basically, I would go over, and I sat behind 2 or 3 times, and of course, very quiet. But I would listen to, and back then you didn't have cell phones where you could put it on speakerphone, so it was just a common phone talked on. But those interviews were really compelling to hear the questions that he would ask, and he liked to talk to Andy. So Andy was one of the few reporters that James Earl Ray would actually talk to. The Ray brothers still proclaimed innocence of James. James always proclaimed innocence. We met both Ray brothers. We went into their homes, one in Quincy, one in Tennessee. And it was a long trip, 8-hour drive to meet one of them, Jerry. And John was the other one. They were very different, the 2 brothers. But it's very sad that they had a life of crime. They weren't in jail or anything at the time, of course, when we met them, and I guess they tried to straighten up some, but they still proclaimed the innocence. I met James Earl Ray's wife in Nashville, Tennessee, when we were doing the book. She was an artist. She married him while he was in prison, which basically it was very weird that she did that. But she told me she thought James had done the crime, and she told me a few things that he had said to her that really made it pretty clear, what had happened. But she used to call me at the Telegraph a lot after I met her. So every month and a half or 2 months, one of my secretaries would answer the phone. It's James Earl Ray's wife. Do you want to talk to her? And I always try to be nice to everybody, so I would talk to her. But she wouldn't ever want to get off the phone, and I of course had 10 stories to write. And I would edit, and I would say, I really got to go. I'd almost have to have somebody come in and get me, but that's a side note. In the book, I visited Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. And I did a portrait of the man that was a co-preacher with both Kings. I met Dr. King's sister, Christine, at the church. She was a pretty remarkable woman. It was pretty amazing to be in that church and to feel, what must have been at one time. And they're in a newer church now. There's an older one across the street. But I met a lot of people that knew Dr. King really well. During the thing, we interviewed the 2 men that invited Dr. King to Memphis. And that was, one was they were both sanitation workers, but they kind of worked their way up into the management and things. And we went to their homes. They didn't want to do it anywhere else. One was a World War II hero. And basically, when he came back to the U.S., he had a really difficult time finding a job. So he had to work in sanitation. And the other guy, I don't think was in the service, but he was in the same boat. Dr. King went to Memphis before the assassination to march for the sanitation workers and try to bring awareness to all the problems and things that they were going through. And so meeting the World War II gentleman, he had tears go down his face, basically talking about it. Still, it was 45 years after his assassination when we were doing this, but he still felt guilty and in some ways responsible for Dr. King's death, which of course he wasn't. But he just always carried that with him, and I think the other guy, Taylor, did too. We spent a lot of time at the National Civil Rights Museum. I stood on the balcony and actually put my feet right where Dr. King was, and they don't let everybody up there. Somehow Andy got us up, to see it. Not many people go there. I also went across the way, and the window was cracked open. Still, I think it always is, like it was when James Earl Ray fired the shots. And I'm a marksman in a lot of ways. I don't shoot anymore, but I grew up in the country, so I almost had to carry a rifle or something all the time. And it was not a very long shot, with a rifle, and the position, it would have been very easy for him to have done what he did. Plus, James was trained; he was in the service and had quite a bit of training as far as shooting. So that was interesting. I met the undertaker, and there's a story about him that actually prepared Dr. King's body. And he, I don't remember how many thousand people went through. I have it in the book, but they had to change carpet because so many people, came through, and he felt such a responsibility to prepare him because he had seen him. I don't know. I don't think it's probably in here. Maybe I don't remember. It's been a while since it came out. But he was driving down the street, and Martin Luther King pulled up. He was being taken by somebody, and waved to him, and they talked. And then about 5-6 hours later, they brought him in. He'd been shot and killed. So imagine him having to try to prepare the body after seeing him and knowing the fame of Dr. King and what a responsibility that was. The last person that we interviewed while we were there, and I actually went back another time with Andy and interviewed this man. He was the only one living, and I honestly don't know if he's still alive or not, Reverend Billy Kyles. But he spent the last hour with Dr. King inside the hotel room, and when Dr. King was shot, this man went out and actually held his head. Basically, this is kind of gross, but he had blood all over him after that, and I think he carried that with him his whole life too. And there just wasn't much they could do. When Dr. King was hit, the shot hit him in a position that he was almost dead right then and there. He didn't say anything to this gentleman, because this gentleman was actually the one that held him and tried to help wherever he could. But and I don't think he was up. He wasn't one of them that pointed up. You've seen that famous pointing shot. But I did Andy's eulogy, as I said, at his funeral. I probably wouldn't have done the book and the series if it hadn't been for a lot of Andy's memories and thoughts. I think racism still exists in our country, and I think it's on both fronts. I don't think it's just on the black side, but the white side. I think we still have a lot of problems in that vein. I have 2 girls, and I'm hoping that their generation, and I hope I don't have grandchildren, of course, yet. I hope my children's generation, and my grandchildren's generation continue to try to make the world more acceptable to all people, because I think it still is very much there, and I hope one day it goes away. So anything you can do in your life to help those thoughts, or somebody that you meet or see, I think, and Rotary has a huge impact, and I think really from the civil rights standpoint, there's still a lot to be done, and even locally, I'm sure there's things that you guys could do.